So yeah, I kind of took a break just to watch the conference finals. I didn't really think there was much to talk about. I mean, I probably could have dropped a video or two, about some games here and there. But overall, I just wanted to wait for the finals and kind of just give like a pretty big analysis on the matchup. Just quick thoughts on, Pacers Knicks game 6. It was a pretty good game. And overall, I think New York, they just stayed in the game overall, but Indiana just ended up being the better team, which is kind of shocking because going into the series, I mean, if you look at the stats, the Knicks were a better offensive team than the Pacers, and they tied each other for defensive rating. They were both at a 114.3 in defensive rating, finishing I think 13th and 14th in the NBA overall. It was a pretty intriguing matchup, but that three from Halliburton that just sealed the game in the fourth quarter, that was just crazy. I was watching, I'm like, damn, bro, he ain't have to do him like that. From the logo, it was crazy. But props to the Knicks. Hopefully, he could just run things back. I know they have some things to figure out with contracts or whatever. I think Mikal Bridges, he's due for a contract pretty soon. I don't know what's going on with Cat. I actually think Cat might be due for a contract, but, props to the Knicks. And, obviously just props to the Pacers for just outplaying them the entire series. I mean, going into the season, I never even imagined Indiana just being where they're at right now. I thought they were a fluke team from last year because, everyone was injured and they had an easy ride to the conference finals. But looking at the landscape now and, the playoff journey they've had, they're not a fluke. They beat a healthy Knicks team. You could argue that the Bucks weren't healthy with Dame out and, obviously not having the best supporting cast, but, they still got the job done. You can't really complain. Even if Dame, wasn't injured and the Bucks were healthy, I still think the Pacers would have won that series, to be honest. Simply because they just had a better supporting cast than the Milwaukee Bucks. So, let's get into Pacers Thunder. First off, let's just get the easy stuff out the way. The Thunder, they finished top 5 in offense. They're a top 5 defense. And the Pacers are 13th in defense. So, obviously, if you're going up against a top 5 offense and you're 13th in defense, you're going to leave a lot of points on the board. So, that's the easy way to look at it, but I think it's more nuanced. We just seen the Pacers, beat the New York Knicks. The Knicks were a higher offensive rating than the Pacers and, tied for defense. The thing with the Thunder, though, is that they are third in the NBA for offense and they're first for defense. So that's a pretty intriguing matchup for the Pacers. Simply because, you don't really see teams, especially young teams, as the Thunder, have a top 3 offense and they're number 1 in defense. Now, when we look at Indiana, they are 13th in defense and they're 9th in offense. So still top 10 offense, that's nothing too shabby. And, defense is it's teetering on the edge of mediocre, but I think in the playoffs, the Indiana Pacers has definitely stepped up their defense. So going into the series, what can we see possibly from, either side? I'll start with Indiana first. We're definitely going to see a lot of Halliburton in this series, just using that pick and roll. The Thunder bigs, they do a pretty good job just hedging screens or, keeping up with the guard play in the pick and roll. So, we might see a few games where Halliburton just struggles, as we've seen in this series. Once they went that double big lineup, it was pretty hard for Halliburton to get going in the first half. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple games where Halliburton just doesn't get it going in the first half. And, he just has these bad games. Simply with Tyrese Halliburton, just his aggressiveness is what dictates, how Indiana plays. If they play fast and they play their brand of basketball, they usually come out with the W. If the game starts to slow down for them, that's when we start to see them have trouble. So, depending on Tyrese Halliburton's aggressiveness in the pick and roll or just in scoring in general or, just making a play off the dribble, that really dictates how the Pacers are going to play the game. So if they're able to get up and down the court, we're going to see a lot of transition threes, transition layups, fast break dunks, as we've seen in this game. But if the Thunder are just able to slow them down, which I wouldn't be surprised if there's a game or two here where, the Thunder just get them out their comfort zone. The Pacers are going to struggle, definitely. I think Siakam's going to be a pretty big factor in this series, simply because he's the only... Well, actually, no, let me take that back. He's the second guy in the starting lineup that could just create a shot off the dribble efficiently. I think he's better at it than Tyrese Haliburton. Haliburton doesn't really have that in his game. He could create a shot, but Siakam, he could just back you down, get in the post, and get, a mid-range shot or wherever he wants to get to. Nembhard's the other guy in the starting lineup that could create a shot for themselves. But yeah, Siakam, he's definitely just going to be a big factor in this series, simply because if they load up on Tyrese Haliburton, there's going to have to be a guy that could just go out there and just get a bucket when they need it. And, obviously Pascal Siakam is that guy for the Indiana Pacers. And of course, I was just talking about it, Andrew Nembhard, he gets to create a shot off the dribble. He kind of played a little bad for these past few games, but he definitely stepped it up on the defensive end. And to get into that, who's going to go on Shea? I think the most obvious matchup would most likely be Aaron Nesmith. I see a little bit of Nembhard on Shea simply because of what we've seen with what he did with Jalen Brunson tonight. But overall, Aaron Nesmith has just done a great job with, these guards. Jalen Brunson was basically like a warm-up for him against Shea, because Shea's just Jalen Brunson on steroids when it comes to the free throws. So I definitely see that being a matchup. To talk a little bit about the Thunder, who will we see on Tyrese Haliburton? Now, there's a lot of guys that the Thunder can just throw at Tyrese Haliburton. I mean, that's how deep they are. That's how much size they have. At the top of my dome, I would most likely think they would put Lou Dort, simply because he's their best perimeter defender. But I could hypothetically see a scenario where, they just have Shea on Tyrese Haliburton, which I wouldn't be surprised if they just have Shea on Tyrese Haliburton, because Shea's not that bad of a defensive player. He never really has been. I wouldn't be surprised if they just threw Lou Dort on Siakam, and the Thunder, just play a switch defense. So, let's say someone gets caught on the screen, just switch the man and, just keep it continuing. But yeah, the Thunder are just at that point to where they could just throw anyone on Tyrese Haliburton. Offensively, they're going to get their buckets. I mean, top 3 offense in the NBA. They move the ball around a lot. And in a sense, they kind of do just play like the Pacers. Like, they're just a very team-oriented. Shea's going to get his. Jalen Williams is going to get his. And, all the shooters on the perimeter are going to eat. An issue I do see being a problem in this series is possibly the big man depth that the Thunder have. I think that will play a factor against Indiana, because Indiana, their big man, Tony Bradley, played great, but I don't really know how that injury has affected him. And then also Thomas Bryant, he played great tonight, but can you really trust Thomas Bryant with 10-15 minutes a game just to provide something in the game? I don't know if that's doable for Thomas Bryant. But besides that little tangent, who do I got winning? In a sense, this Pacers run kind of reminds me of the 2011 Giants, how they just went through these juggernauts of teams and somehow came out on top. And part of me wants to say Indiana comes out on top, but I really don't know. I still might go to Pacers, to be honest. I think I'm done just doubting them. Like, they're a great team. They've shown it through the playoffs this year. And I honestly might go Indiana. Even though the Thunder are the better team, Indiana's just always found a way to win. I mean, I thought they were going to lose against the Knicks, and they didn't. So I think this series is going to be a very, very grindy series. Like, very, very chess-oriented, kind of. And, I think it's just going to be one of those great 6, maybe even possibly 7-game series. But, we'll see. I think the game 1's probably like a week away or something. They usually wait a pretty good amount of time before they start the finals. But, yeah, that's just my gist on the series so far, like a little analysis before the series starts. I'm going to probably drop some videos about the series. And, the content's probably going to slow down a little bit simply because, eventually the season's going to end. And, I'm gonna have to find some things to talk about or whatever. Which I have something in the vault that I'm gonna drop. But yeah, just let me know y'all comments, thoughts on the series, thoughts on the Knicks Pacers series, thoughts in general. Great series coming up, and yeah, I'm out.